Hi, folks. We talked last Sunday about the power of our faith to create ground that God meets us on. He's still going to retain being God, and he will be sovereign, and he's still going to do what is good for us, and we can trust that. But he won't always do it the way you want or what you want. Faith, though, provides that ground that God stays God, and you are allowed to have him do his work in and through you. When was the last time you really panicked on something? I mean panicked. It hit you. A shock came into your life of some sort. And it's like your first response is, wow, just starting to panic. Maybe a health issue, maybe a relational issue, a financial issue. And it just caught you, it blindsided you. Well, this is what happened actually to Daniel in the scriptures that we've been covering since Sunday, having to do with a time when the king has this dream, and he changes the context, he changes the rules, and he comes at them and says, guys, I'm not telling you the dream, you got to tell me the dream and the interpretation. Daniel and his three friends are not in that particular meeting, they're just graduates yet. And but we do find that those wise men and astrologers that he did call in just couldn't handle this. It was like to them the craziest thing they'd ever heard. And when they got that shock, and the shock was this, he told them, and if you don't do that, tell me the dream and the interpretation, I'm killing you, I'm tearing down your houses, your families, everything. I mean, that was a shock. And their only response to this was the same deal. So in this, we want to talk to you today about how do you build this ground of faith, and what's important, that those first initial steps when these things come that challenge us and can be actually just like a huge shocks that come into our life. How do you build faith ground for God to meet you on in that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think just hearing your intro kind of just takes my breath away, thinking of a time in my life when I was met with some shocking news, and my initial reaction was that sort of panic, but quickly came this peace and just knowing God is bigger than this, and we had been able to just process it differently than previous times, just trusting and knowing that God was in control, and we were able to go into a different mode. I can definitely relate to what these wise men had done, which was just go into this panic and repetition, almost like this programming of we can't do that, nobody can do that. And for them, that was their whole gig. They were basically confessing as a sham, but that was what panic does, right? You throw everything to the wayside, and they're just begging for their life, essentially.
No new wisdom, no new options.
Yeah.
Their brains have frozen, literally. They've gone into brain freeze here.
Yeah, and all they focused on was the impossibility of it. This is just impossible, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, they were building the excuse and the blame, right?
Yeah.
Those are the two things we tend to start building early in these things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they're building the blame. King, you're being unreasonable.
Yeah, they're blaming him,
Huh?
They're blaming him, and then, excusing themselves. No man could do this,
It's not our lack. It's you, King. It's on your unreasonableness.
Yeah.
And so on. So, one thing you do see at the beginning of a shock for anybody is always this push to go into this panic mode. The problem with that is that is when the brain can stop functioning, really.
It does.
And then you just basically are going into the same routine of response, the same problem solving you've always tried. There's nothing fresh, there's nothing new, because everything's freezing up on you. Daniel, on the other hand, handled this differently than these guys. Arioch comes to them, and he's going to take them now to join the rest of these guys so they can all be executed. And Daniel's response is, wow, what is going on here? He starts asking questions. In essence, it says this, and I do want to read this one part in here, where it says, Daniel spoke to Arioch, the guy that came to take them to be executed, with wisdom and tact.
Right.
He didn't just go
panic
mode.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah,
and
defense.
freeze.
Exactly. He was able to right away go into, like, his life was literally on the line, but he was able to go into this seeking knowledge and exercising wisdom and tact. And why was this? Well, Daniel already had built this ground, this faith, this strong relationship with God. We've explored it in these first several weeks of just how Daniel's faith was so strong and so immovable, and this was the result of that ground that had already been built, right? And it expanded on that as well, this test.
Yeah, and so he started to seek knowledge, right, rather than just panicking on the fact that, oh no, we're going to die. He wanted context. He wanted to know, whoa, okay, hang on. Why has the king, it says in verse 15, why has the king issued such a harsh decree? He wanted to know the background. He wanted to know the story. What's going on here?
Because he knew this wasn't like the king. This wasn't what the king just went around doing all the time. So he knew that this must have really shook the king, whatever was going on.
Yeah, not just a regular nightmare or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we end up with a situation where Daniel's trail's completely different than the other guys. And he starts to, you see, this is what, and you bring it up, Angie, this is what Daniel's already has a practice of doing.
Yes.
He's looking to take things that come that are shocks into his life to faith ground. He doesn't just let panic grab it and fear ground take over where everything good is freezing up and wisdom can't be found. Tact is not available. Rather, we find the opposite.
Yeah.
He is in a place where he knows that no matter what comes into his life, he's had some big shocks. So when they come into his life, he just takes it to faith ground. And he's able to pursue wisdom and tact with Arioch and the king.
Yeah.
And part of that leads immediately, once he gets a context of this, that, wow, the king has changed the rules, but there's a good reason for it. So God, there's something going on here. He immediately knows that this is a challenge for his faith ground. And when we figure that out, and the sooner we figure that out when shocks come to your life, whether it's a health shock. I remember when Linda was diagnosed with cancer, health shock.
Yeah.
The sooner that we figured out this was a faith ground challenge, the absolute more control we had over any panic taking control.
Absolutely.
It was more our brains could function. We could sit and get the best information, pursue everything that we could. And that's, as a Christian, one of the great benefits of immediately taking these things into faith ground, where your faith is building a ground for God to meet you on. And you're calling out on that ground, God, meet me on this.
Yes.
I need your wisdom. I need your wisdom.
Having the proper perspective and context for whatever that situation is allows you to approach it completely differently. And as Christians, we know how to do that then, to turn it to God.
Absolutely. And then he brings the wisdom. And the wisdom of God is always extremely comforting, as you will see in this story, how for Daniel and his three buddies, this was for them, wow, you're amazing, God. And they felt empowered then. They had the dream. They had the interpretation the next morning, and all of this works out. But it's this initial phase that made them the choice servants they were.
Right.
That their faith wasn't something that kicked in somewhere way down here.
After the panic subsided,
Right.
It's something that challenged the panic immediately and allowed them to function immediately because they didn't have any time.
That's right.
And they could respond very quickly because they went to God.
Yeah. Yeah, they weren't shocked by what was happening, really. And I think we know, in our lives, there are going to be big challenges. There are going to be things that want to shake our foundation and rock us. And we shouldn't be shocked when they come into our lives. But, right now, while we're going through our day-to-day, we need to be building on that faith relationship with God, building that ground with God, operating in that, so that when these shocks come, we don't respond with panic. We respond with wisdom and strong faith.
Yeah. And And Daniel, it says, when it wants to see the king and requested more time to tell the king what the dream meant. And that gave him time to go and consult with his friends, to get together with others, so that they could, 2, 3, 4 better than one, right? And these guys all had a sort of a solid faith foundation, so they got to sit down and really try and figure out, okay, what's God up to? What's our response to this?
Like, what a very rational thing to do, right? They're the king's servants, really, and then to have that boldness to go and, okay, first ask the right questions, and then go and talk to the king and ask him for more time. He's in the process of, having these guys executed or calling for that to happen. Oh, can you just give us a little more time?
Well, and I think the reason that the king said okay is because he said, we will tell you what the dream meant, right?
Yeah.
So when it hits you in life, the shocks of life, little, large, panic will create a ground, but it's frozen ground. It's iceberg territory. Everything freezes up on you. Faith creates a ground where God and you, kind of like Adam and Eve and him in the Garden of Eden, will come, and there'd be fellowship. And this is what faith does. Faith creates ground and calls out to God, because it's God that's going to bring to you and return to you context, perspective, purpose, and hope. Panic brings you none of those. None of those in any good way. And so we would encourage you to take a look at the ground that gets built immediately when shocks come for you. I don't know about you, but I tend to get at least a couple shocks a week. And that's the truth. Things that come that I can't control. Things that are happening that aren't good. I have learned that my faith has to work, and it works at creating this ground that I immediately go to. Where do you immediately go? God bless you.